Hello guys, I'm back from another video on this video talking about what if Belle was OP as hell. So, in the last video we talked about how, well, we mostly talked about, Belle's origins, where Belle was basically brought to the dungeon because both of his, parents were told to basically go there for another, quest. But unfortunately, they died and left Belle in the hands of the, dungeon, where he lived for several years. Bell would basically gain a skill, which this skill is quite overpowered, by the way. It basically allows him to, gain the abilities of other monsters by basically eating them. Similar to Rimuru from my that time I got reincarnated as a slime. It's basically the same skill as that. And then he started becoming infamous for basically terrorizing that, sector of the dungeon, and people call him Skullface for that reason. Because when he's basically fighting, he usually just wears a skull-like mask. Like, for example, a skull of a, minotaur, or for another example, a lizard person, or whatever you want to call them, or a naga, or many other, monsters that he basically slain. And a few adventures, let's just say some random adventures, specifically from the Loki Familia. And by the way, they're not like the, Loki Familia members, like for example, Finn, Loki, Finn or, Bet or anything like that. They're just like random members, which they sort of, had a bit of a cocky leader. In this case, which I'm just going to be calling him because I don't really named him. I mostly just called him Broadsword Guy, so I'm just going to call him Broadsword Guy. So, Broadsword Guy was a bit of a, narcissist, and believed that if he were to basically, kill, Skullface, aka Belle, he would be recognized as a great hero, and he would sort of become, a legend upon everybody, including many of the other, members of his team, except for one, which was an elf guy, which, this elf, well, he doesn't want to be a part of it, because after knowing about the whole disappearances when they go into the dungeon, and some of those disappearances, some of them would basically disappear, but some would basically be alive, but those that basically still are alive, that basically survived, Skullface, aka Belle's rampages, well, they decide to just stop being adventures altogether, so he would just gladly decline. And so those people, or more specifically, the Loki Familia members that decide to, fight this guy, aka, Belle, let's just say it's not even a fight. It was more of a slaughter. Which, oh boy, let's just say they were freaking dead. So, Belle would basically kill all of them and basically take away their weapons and armor. And so, after that, he would basically go back to his little, shelter or tent or whatever, which he gotten from a random adventure, basically going into the, dungeon, or more specifically, his sector of the dungeon, and he basically killed him and getting his, stuff. Mostly his tent and, many other supplies like, rations. And so, Belle would basically go onto his bed and puts all of his stuff in a, or at least the stolen stuff that he basically gotten from those, idiot venturers, which he puts them in a kind of like a bag of holding. And if you don't know what it is, just imagine it just like the bag of holding from, D&D or Dungeons and Dragons. So, after putting them in, he would basically fall to sleep. So, that is basically what happened last episode. And so, let's talk about what happens next. So, we're going to be moving to a different perspective. In this case, the Loki Familia, or more specifically, the main, Loki Familia members, like for example, Bet, and also Eyes, and many other people from that, you basically get it. So, as Eyes is basically looking around the city, seeing that it's, kind of changed ever since they gone in that, little meeting with the other, nations of that world. As Bet would say this, "Finally, we're back. I've been looking to maybe get some rest. That meeting was horrible. I felt shitty." As one of them would say this, specifically Finn. Bet, can you please calm down and... Wait, where's Loki? as everybody would realize that Loki is not there, as they would hear the sound of rampaging. More specifically, Loki being angry that she couldn't get her, fill of Soma, or more specifically, the Soma wine, or at least I think that's the name. I can't really remember, but I think it was just like Soma wine or something of that sort. So, as she would basically start rampaging, as one of them would say this, specifically Eyes. Alright, I'll be handling it. As Tione and Tiona would say this. Oh, sure, boss. As they would basically just like see, Eyes leaving as she would start to go toward the sound of a raging Loki. As one of them would say this. So, this is my first time basically joining this, Familia, so do you have anything or as one of them would say this. Wait for a second. One of them would say, oh, you kinda look a bit nervous. As she would say this, well, it is my first time being in a Familia, so as Beth would say this. Just shut up already. As she would say this. Oh, no, oh, okay. As one of them would say this. Bet, you don't need to say that. I meant he would say this. Whatever. As he would start to, get a little bit pissed. As everybody is basically just like comforting her, as one of them would say this, specifically Tiona, which is I think it was the big titty one. I can't remember because Tiona and Tione, I don't really remember their names, and every time when I tried to Google search them, unfortunately, they were both, most of the pictures where I usually see them are basically just like, both of them at the same time. So I really don't know each and every one of them. So I'm just gonna say that Tiona is the big titty one and Tione is the, less than down one, let's just say that. So Tiona would say this. Oh, by the way, I don't really catch your name. So can you tell me your name at least? So I can, as she would say this. Oh, you can just call me. Oh, just call me Livia. Livia Devilis. Or at least I think that's the name. Let me just double check. I meant Livia Viridis. At least I think that's the actual pronunciation. So she would say that as Tiona would say this. Oh, okay, Livia. As they would basically shake hands, as many people would basically start to cheer for them. Except for Loki and, the Sword Princess, aka, Eyes. Which, currently, Eyes is still basically trying to, catch Loki from basically trying to, catch some hands. Oh god, yeah, let's just say Loki is still pretty much pissed off that she couldn't drink. So, yeah. So, after they gone back to their, to their large little mansion, one of them would say this. So, where's the broadsword guy? As one of them would say this. Yeah, we didn't really see him. As they would see one of his, party members. Specifically, the elf guy. As Tiona would say this. Hey, elf guy? What happened to, broadsword guy? As he would say this. Oh, well, unfortunately, him and the rest of my team decided to go and take down Skullface. As everybody would basically hear this, as Leafia would say this. Wait, who's Skullface? As one of them would say this, specifically Eyes. Well, Skullface is quite a infamous figure here in Arario. He's said to be a powerful monster, even stronger than anybody else. Even stronger than probably a... Wait for a sec. Probably even stronger than a level 9. As everybody would basically hear this. As they would say this, specifically Bet. That's just a stupid legend. They probably just died from natural causes, or maybe they were just too stupid to basically just I don't know, basically listen to reason. As one of them specifically says this, specifically Rivia. Seriously, Bet? Can you please shut it? We certainly need to tell the guild about this as well. As Loki would say this. They were pretty useless anyway, so... As everybody would just turn around and basically see Loki once again, as Loki would say this. What? I'm just telling you the facts. I mean, the only reason why I decided to let them join is because I was pretty much pitying them. As everybody would just basically have this deadpan expression, as they would just say, Alright, anyway, we should probably get some sleep. As Rivia would basically would start to, change her clothes, as she would basically go into the showers to basically, have a bit of mean time by herself. As for the rest, they would basically fall asleep. So, let's go back to Belle. Belle is currently in the dungeon, basically eating some monsters. Mostly some high level ones, which currently Belle in the system, or at least the system that's basically, giving him his powers, he's technically a level, I don't know, a level 50, which in the eyes of, like, a regular old, like, or at least the system in this universe, or in this case, the Damanchi universe, he's like the equivalent of, I don't know, a level freaking 9, which, yeah. So, yeah, he's basically one of the highest level, people right there. And he's pretty much super powerful at this point. He's able to, I don't know, basically kill a. Wait for a second. Let's just say he's able to beat down, like, I don't know, maybe like a high level freaking monster, like, for example, like a Hydra, for an example, or another one, like maybe like a, a somewhat, weaker version of, like, the Black Dragon. So, yeah, Belle in this one is super overpowered. Well, it makes sense because the What If is called What If Belle was overpowered as hell. So, yeah. So, Belle has been, doing some stuff in the dungeon, mostly just like, mostly doing some stuff like, for example, hunting down monsters, eating them, maybe having a bit of a nap, maybe even training, fixing up his weapons, which, thanks to the help of a certain adventurer basically going through the dungeon, he would accidentally, let him borrow his forge. I'm putting in quotation marks because he literally killed him. Remember, paranoid. So, he would basically uses the forge to basically reforge his weapons and also upgrade them. Except for his large broadsword, which is his, main weapon. He decided to just keep it broken because the large, laser sword that he makes from it is pretty much stronger than any weapon that he can make. The only reason why he reforges the weapons that he literally has is because, he thinks it's, pretty useful. Like, for example, he can just use one of the swords that he basically, borrowed, quote unquote, and basically uses it as a type of, throwing weapon, for an example. Or for another example, using a spear as like a, fishing spear. So, yeah. So, Belle has been doing pretty great there. And Belle is gonna have a bit of company very soon. So, let's go back to the rest of the Loki Familia. So, apparently, Loki was told by the guild to basically bring in two different, adventurers to basically go into the dungeon to defeat this so-called Skullface. Apparently, they just want him killed. Or captured, at least. So, after being told of this, they would basically bring in two different, adventures in her, Familia. In this case, Tione and Tiona, and keep in mind, unlike in this, unlike in canon, Tiona didn't really had any feelings for Finn because they didn't really fought at the start. So yeah, so she's basically doesn't have any, feelings towards Finn, just as, she just thinks of him as like, as the captain or something of that sort. So yeah. So take a guess what's that supposed to mean in the future of this one. So, after being told of this, both Tione and Tiona were basically told to go to the dungeon to basically try and capture or at least kill or whatever to basically get that, sector of the, dungeon cleared from, you know, from Skullface, aka Belle. So, after being told of this, they would basically start to go into the dungeon. So, after they gone into the dungeon, this is apparently where the so-called Skullface is supposed to be living, as one of them would say this. So, where is this Skullface guy, sis? As Tione would say this. I don't know. This is gonna be pretty annoying to deal with. I mean, how bad is it be? I mean, how ca- I meant, wait for a second. How bad could it be? I mean, I heard that so many adventurers are basically killed by this guy, or at least by this monster, but still, as they would basically go into the dungeon, as they would start looking around this, large, sector of the dungeon, as they would say this. Well, I heard this place is fairly filled with monsters, but lately this place has been pretty empty, except for low-level monsters, as she would start to hear, start to hear scuttling. As in scuttling, I mean the sound of, whimpering and also cowardice. So, they would start to go towards that sound as they would see a few golems, not really golems, more like, I meant goblins. I meant goblins. These goblins were basically shaking in fear by this person, or should I say, Skullface. So, this is what Belle looks like. So, Belle looks like this, as they would see the large, man with a half, kind of half, one arm is basically clad in this gold and red gauntlet and shoulder pad, while the rest is basically, all black, gray, and many other things like that. He's also wearing under that is his typical, I guess you could say jacket. I don't really know what to call it, but instead of being, kind of, a bit cleanish, instead it's torn a bit thanks to the help of some monsters basically attacking him. As he would basically point his, crimson blade, or at least somewhat crimson blade, which is this one, which is glowing from, the energy that's basically coming out of it, pointing it at the goblins, as he would start to cut them down one by one, killing them all, as after he finishes, the rest of them, he would basically start to grab one of them, as he would start to take off his mask, partially, as he would start to eat the flesh of one of the golems. I meant goblins, I meant. So, after eating one of the goblins, he would start to gain some of their skills. In this case, Rampage, Bloodlust, and, what is that skill called? And Rally, which Bell doesn't really like it, except for Bloodlust, so he would basically keep that one, and the rest would basically be, erased. After basically eating the flesh of one of the, goblins, which is the leader of that group, he would start to walk back to his, little base, as both of them would basically whisper to themselves, so that's Skullface? Wait, if he's not... Wait a minute. If he was a monster, then why did he have somewhat of a human face? As one of them would say this, specifically Tiona. Well, I think... Yeah, as she would basically start to explain. Maybe Skullface was actually just a boy basically living in this, dungeon for a while, and maybe doesn't know any human contact at all. Maybe we can, as they would start to, start thinking their minds, maybe instead of, killing him, instead, maybe, bring him back to the surface and make him learn how to become a normal-ass human. And maybe even become an adventurer. So, after thinking of this, they would decide to not kill him, but instead capture him and bring him back to the surface. So, they would basically start to follow him to his little base of operations, which is his large tent. He would basically start to grab the weapons of the goblins which he has slain, and started putting them in the furnace that he borrowed. So, after cleaning the weapons, he would basically start to put them in his, bag of holding, as he would start to feel a bit sleepy. So, he would start to yawn as he would take off his mask, showing off his somewhat undamaged face. So, when the girls see this, they would start to, blush a little. The Amazon twins would basically start to blush a little, thinking that he's kind of cute. So, after taking off the mask and letting his, long hair basically just basically flow out of there, he would basically start to, get ready to get some sleep. So, Belle would basically go into his tent as he would basically fall asleep. So, for both, Tione and Tiona, they would start to walk towards, his little campsite. And so they would start to, tiptoe there as they would start looking around. They would see that the rest of the weapons that are basically not fixed yet, they were still there, and she would basically recognize one of the swords. Specifically, the broadsword of the broadsword guy from the last episode. As she would say this, wait, that's broadsword guy's sword. As one of them would say this, being, Tione. Yeah, wait, does that mean he... as both of them would basically start to look at the tent, as they would say this. Yeah, I think so. I think he did kill him. As one of them would say this. Wait, if he did kill them, then how was he that strong in the first place? As they would start to, start stuttering in their mind, thinking that he's probably pretty powerful. And indeed, he is. So, they would start to think of a plan to basically try and bring him back to the surface. But unfortunately, they would accidentally step on a, crossbow, which was still loaded, as when, Tione basically stepped on it, it would activate it as it causes a bit of a bit of a noise. As both of them would basically start to, stutter, as they would realize that they basically made a bit of noise and they think that, Bill is basically awake. And indeed, he is. So, Bell would basically come out of his tent, basically getting ready into his, battle stance. And instead of using his, broadsword and shield, instead he starts manifesting these large claws, made from his, pent-up rage. One of his claws is basically red like this, and the other one is, gray, like this one. So, as his legs would start to grow a little bit more bestial, as he would start to walk on all fours, as Bell would start to, growl a little bit. And he's not wearing the mask, so yeah. As the girls would basically start to get ready to fight, as Tione would start to charge over there, as she would basically get ready to slash them. Bell would basically charge over there as he would grab the blade with his bare hands and basically destroy it. As she would say this, "What? My sword?" As she would basically check out behind her, as she would basically see another Bell, as Bell would start to create several clones, similar to like Naruto. So, Bell would start to create multiple clones, as these clones would start fighting, both Tione and Tiona. Bell would basically start to, growl a little bit more, as Bell would start to tell all of his clones, or at least mentally, to basically start, to create, this. So, all of his clones would basically start to create large black blades. Blades made from pure darkness. As all of them would start to charge over there, as they would start slashing at them. Both, Tione and Tiona were pretty hurt, but thankfully they've beaten, most of the, most, and I mean most of the, clones. But two of them would basically appear out of nowhere, as they would start to create, these large snakes. But instead of the, the poisonous ones, instead they're more constricting, as they would start to get entangled in the snakes. As while they're basically, stuck there, the real Bell would basically start to walk over there, bearing his claws to the world, as the claws would start extending, as Bell would get ready to kill, Tione. As Tiona would basically say this, "Don't!" As Bell would start to look over there, looking towards Tione. I meant Tiona. As Tiona would say this, "Please don't kill her, we can, negotiate. Yeah, maybe we can negotiate." As Bell would kind of understand her. Thanks to the help of the system would basically translate in his mind, it would basically, make him a little bit more docile. So, Bell would basically tell his clones to basically disappear, as both of them would basically just fall to the ground. Basically just huffing and puffing, because of, the constricting nature of those snakes. So they would start to inhale and exhale, as Bell would basically just look at them. So, Bell would basically tell both of them, or at least not verbally, but more, gesture to them to basically go into his tent, as Bell would start to go towards his tent by himself, as both the girls would basically realize that this kid is overpowered, and also probably a good mate. So, yeah. So, both of them would basically be a bit, comforting now. What do I see? How do I mean by this? Well, they would basically be, a bit, wary. But Tione would basically just like get ready her, um, body, as she would basically run over there and basically, smacks him right in the back of his head, causing him to basically fall to the ground, basically knocked out. So, they would realize that they basically defeated Skullface, and so they would decide to do what they do best. Deciding to bring Bell to, to the Loki Familia. So they can, make him join the Loki Familia and also maybe make, Bell their mate. And I mean maybe. Um, let's just say I'm probably gonna make like a, you know, um, how do we say this? Wait for a second. Make you vote in my community tab for, the ship for, this what if. I'm probably going to make like a little list of people that you can, vote for, but still. So, these two girls would basically just like, carry Bell, and they would also start to grab some of his stuff. So, after doing that, they would start to, go back to the surface. Bell would be pretty much tired and also completely knocked out, as Tione was basically carrying him. She would realize that Bell is pretty heavy, especially with the armor, as, Tione was kind of wondering if he can, maybe have some fun with him, maybe like, oh, I don't know, maybe like, later when he wakes up, if you get what I mean. Anyway, so, after they basically gone out of the dungeon, or at least nearly to the exit of the dungeon, they would basically be approached by the representatives of the guild. So, after showing the actual identity of, Skullface, well, they would just be in shock, and also, what the fuck? They would realize that this kid is Skullface. Wait for a second. They would realize that this kid is freaking Skullface, as they would basically ask, how in the living freaking hell does this kid basically defeat several high ranking adventurers? He's a literal kid. As she would say this. Well, a pretty powerful one at that. And he also seems to have the abilities of monsters. As when they hear this, they would basically start to be afraid, and thinking that it's probably some sort of skill. So, yeah. So, after Loki arrives and sees the kid, she would basically ask both Tione and Tiona, who's this kid? And they would explain that this is, Skullface, as she would basically be in a deadpan expression, as she would say, so that's Skullface. As they would say, yes, that's Skullface. As both of them would say this. Yep, exactly. As she would say this. Really? Yes. They would basically say and yelling, as they would, well, Loki would just be like, okay, let me just let me go outside for a second. She would basically go outside and basically start screaming, saying that this kid is supposed to be freaking Skullface. Like, what the hell? So, yeah. So, they would basically explain, or more specifically, Tione and Tiona would explain how he basically beaten them, or at least somewhat beaten them. Apparently, this kid literally has the powers of some monsters, as when Loki uses her blood to basically check out his skills, well, one of his skills is called Devour, which allows him to, I don't know, basically gain the abilities of other monsters. Which, this skill also gets another ability, or I guess you could say side effect. In this case, it's called Gluttony. It makes him very, very hungry. So, yeah. So, after seeing this, she would be in shock and also intrigued, and basically says that she wants to, make him into, one of their members of the Loki Familia. So, the guild would basically gladly do it, and so Belle would be forced to be a member of the Loki Familia. But Belle is currently still sleeping, or knocked out. So, after that, they would basically leave Belle in the hands of the guild for now. As when they left, they would basically explain everything to, to the rest of the Loki Familia. Let's just say their expressions would just be either shock and also confusion. So, yeah. So, in that case, this is going to be the end of this episode. So, I hope you liked the video, comment and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye!